Hello, I'm teacher Karina, and I'm here to talk to you about the Beat Generation. The Beat Generation was a literary movement that originated in the early 1950s and is often portrayed as a disillusioned post-war generation. However, most American citizens did not share this disillusionment. On the contrary, the 1950s in the United States were marked by a great sense of self-satisfaction and optimism following the triumph in the World War II and the mounting economy. At the time, the United States lived in continuous fear of a third world war, spread by McCarthy's anti-communist paranoia. In this atmosphere, the United States in the 50s were a highly conformist society. In a broad sense, the term Beat Generation refers to an entire generation of youngsters and hipsters experimenting with drugs, criminality, and spiritualism, roaming the country in search of a new faith. This generation was not occupied with the loss of faith like the lost generation, but rather with the need of it. They had had enough of homelessness, valuelessness, faithlessness, and were convinced that the problem of modern life is essentially a spiritual problem. In the strict sense, the term Beat Generation refers to a literary movement and its key writers: Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs, and Jack Kerouac, who developed a reputation as new bohemian hedonist writers celebrating nonconformity and spontaneous creativity. They abided by the rejection of received standards, innovations in style, use of illegal drugs, alternative sexualities, an interest in religion, a rejection of materialism, and explicit portrayals of the human condition. Jack Kerouac was probably the main driving force behind this literary movement. The letters of Neil Cassidy, who would later become the hero of his novel On the Road, inspired his writing style. In these letters, Kerouac discovered a style corresponding to everyday speech. His goal was to transform this natural speech style into literature. Under the influence of natural speech and an interest in experimental jazz, he would come to define his style as spontaneous prose. This generation initiated the counterculture movement in the 1960s, the hippie movement, the anti-war movement, and the open society revolution. They started the cultural innovation that would turn the United States into a more open, critical society. It is in this cultural atmosphere of reaction and innovation that we discern the rise of rock and roll icons. Beat authors had a pervasive influence on rock and roll and popular music, including the Beatles, Bob Dylan, and Jim Morrison. You see, the Beatles spelled their name with an A partly as a Beat Generation reference, and John Lennon was a fan of Jack Kerouac and friends with Allen Ginsberg. Ginsberg was also a close friend of Bob Dylan and toured with him in 1975. Dylan cites Ginsberg and Kerouac as major influences. In the 1970s, Burroughs was a friend of Mick Jagger and Lou Reed. There was a resurgence of interest in the Beats among bands in the 1980s. Ginsberg worked with The Clash. Burroughs worked with REM and Kurt Cobain. However, the Beats were never viewed as coming out of World War II. Unlike previous generations, the Beats never had a great war novel and never spoke passionately in favor of their country's interests. By the time the Vietnam War was being protested, it was 20 years since they were hanging around Columbia University and then scattered around the world, involved in the business of literary fame. The only one speaking against violence was Allen Ginsberg, who was leading the transformation of youth from beatnik to hippie, while Burroughs was fighting his own personal wars, and Kerouac was busy drinking himself to death. For them, it was all supposedly history, or at the very least so far removed from their own existences that it may as well have happened on Mars. Thanks for watching. Bye.